Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the graduation from thinking with the corporeal sense mind to knowing with the soul. Listen as we explore the depths of the divine mind and infinite consciousness. In this show, we will discuss the journey from material belief to scientific knowing and the benefits of divine law. How we think is what we become, and consciousness is experience. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and stop thinking to start knowing. So I see the title of today's show is Mastering the Modes of Mortal Thought. Sounds like we've got a lot of work to do today, so let's get started.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll start by preparing the mental landscape to receive divine revelation by using some of the parables of Jesus, like throwing the money changers out of the Father's house, the resurrection of Lazarus, the transfiguration, using the types of soil where the divine ideas are planted, Jesus riding into Jerusalem on the colt of an ass. All of this symbolism is very helpful in how to graduate from thinking with the 5 corporeal senses to knowing with the soul, or knowing with your 7 spiritual senses. Without realization, without turning, what was called repent, changing how we're thinking, there's no way of knowing the truth that will make us free from the belief in mortality.
Well, let's start with the first parable that you mentioned when Jesus throws the money changers out of his Father's house. What is it we should understand about that?
Well, what he is trying to tell us is we must purify. We have to eliminate all of our human concepts, theories, beliefs from consciousness. In order to invite divine mind into your awareness, you have to create a hospitable environment. Like attracts like. Once you understand, initially you're out of the Father's house, and what you are trying to do is get back into this good grace where divine mind can start to acknowledge itself as you. And so we have to do things in order to enable this or induce this God experience. If you wanted to build a website from scratch, there's a lot to learn, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or PHP, and then learning how to apply things where you may build from a static text and image, add color and shape, work in functionality. Learning how to think as a human, leading to knowing the truth, for me, is a similar journey. As Mary Baker Eddy told Martha Wilcox, faithful and orderly with the objects of sense makes us receptive to the deeper things of the divine principle. It's helpful to have a template, a schematic, a blueprint to keep information organized. We use the man, the bull, the lion, and the eagle suggested in Revelations to provide the map for the expedition from sense to soul, which includes things like the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 7 personal planets, as a diagram for total consciousness, for inner and outer guidance. Without these tools, it's very difficult to accomplish what it is we are being asked to do. And one of the reasons why I think we have lost the message of the Christ collectively.
So, let's talk just a moment about that. What would you say would be the message of the Christ?
Well, of course, the message of the Christ was the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It tells us to heal the sick, reform sinner, raise the dead. It is our responsibility to glorify the Creator. And the only way that we glorify the Creator is by being that place where we reveal the divine creation. We become that avenue where the divine creation, the fruits of the Spirit, are starting to externalize, influence the mental material world that is not the divine creation.
It's interesting that you talked about glorifying the Creator, because we had a conversation a while ago about the Olympics and how when they were first formed was for these athletes to prove how they glorified the Creator, and now it just seems a little bit different. Can you kind of just review what we talked about?
Yeah, the intention was whoever could attain what was called the highest understanding of right, the closest thing to the divine creation, which is perfection. The more we are able to demonstrate that by keeping our mind in constant relation with the divine self, the truth of our being, as opposed to this idea of glorifying a personal sense of self. Now, there's a big difference when you're doing something from a personal level, because when you're doing it from a personal level, which is what we would say thinking with your 5 corporeal senses, you can do it for good or for bad, because it is driven by a belief in 2 powers. You're under the law of karma. You're in the cycle of death and rebirth. But to do things under the government of divine law is to do it under the protection of the power of one. It can only be done for absolute goodness, without opposite. The Olympics was really a way for the world to get together and to say, well, who is demonstrating this divine law with any kind of scientific certainty? But instead, we seem to glorify the personal, and we have lost touch with the divine aspect.
So if we can master these modes of modal thought, that would help us or get us to that point where we can glorify the Creator?
Only reason walks through the open door of revelation. Before we can give up this personal sense of self, we really have to master it. That's one of the reasons why Jesus goes into Jerusalem on the colt of an ass. Another symbol that I remember using was Lai Tzu riding a bull. This idea of overcoming the world. And it starts with your lowest level of consciousness, what Mary Baker Eddy called animal magnetism. Instinct, appetite, preservation, survival. This is all fear-based motivation. Fear is the defense mechanism for the false sense of self, the personal sense of self, which is going to expire. The mortal sense of self lives in fear, chronic anxiety. And a big part of a spiritual practice is learning how to manage this fear. And you can do that quite well by learning how to control how you think. But again, faithful and orderly with the objects of sense, you have to build a mental landscape that will support the divine principle. In order to make this successful, you have to reformat your value system so that you know you are spirit. And as spirit, there are no needs. Spirit is not trying, striving, struggling, seeking, planning, or even asking. Spirit rests in the knowledge. Life is perfect, eternal, and changeless. And then, of course, like we say, mastering these modes of thought. There are 3 modes of mortal thought. Mary Baker Eddy let us know about. You can find them in Revelations in the Bible. They're represented by the dragon and 2 beasts. They're also found in the 666, which is the law of karma, and the never-ending belief in 2 powers instead of the belief in the one divine principle. It produces this thought loop, which are these 3 modes of thought. Never-ending imperfection. The recursive process of overcoming this world begins with understanding how the system works. We start with animal magnetism, which is the hypnotic state induced by the belief in 2 powers, represented by the fall from the belief in the one power. Fear drives the machine, and by education we begin to master the belief in mortality using evidence provided by the corporeal senses. We graduate from emotion and reaction to human intelligence when we implement our mental functions, perception, reason, memory, intuition. This builds the staging to help overcome the collective consciousness of world thought, which is also rooted in infantile defense mechanisms. These are the 3 modes of mortal thought we must master. We graduate from being reactive and emotional to human intelligent to worldly wise. And then we walk reason through the open door of revelation, where we step out into the light, the full light of the divine mind, back in the Father's house under the divine law of one life.
Swami, how can we simplify what the 3 modes of mortal thought are?
Well, to keep it together, what we use are the mutable signs in the zodiac. So Gemini, which would be the lower mind, instinct, appetite, preservation, survival, fear-based motivation. Virgo would be the mid-mind, which would be human intelligence. Again, where you're processing your responses using mental functions and the testimony of the corporeal senses. The higher mind is symbolized by Sagittarius, which is the collective consciousness. Those are the 3 modes of mortal thought. They are mortal because they are under the jurisdiction of karmic law. They are all driven by a belief in 2 powers, the good and evil world of energy that we have to overcome because it isn't real. And then finally you graduate to Pisces, which is represented by divine mind, where everything is happening at once under the government of perfection, divine law, eternal life without opposite or change.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Asana class is a module fitting into the master plan, leading the practitioner to the experience of total consciousness. by attuning the mind-body complex to the divine idea. A system of exercises designed to use the physical appearance to determine individual level of consciousness and degree of awareness, starting with the process of lengthening and strengthening muscles to bring bones into the position of internal support. We educate thought up to spiritual apprehension, because when spirit is cause, it calls into expression the beauty of holiness, making creation perfect. Mountain pose may not bring you truth in consciousness, but truth in consciousness must bring mountain pose. Visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. Swami, I see we have next a soundbite from Mary Baker Eddy's Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures that I think we should play.
Mary Baker Eddy, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, pages 117 to 118. Evidence drawn from the 5 physical senses relates solely to human reason, and because of opacity to the true light, human reason dimly reflects and feebly transmits Jesus' works and words. Truth is a revelation. Jesus bade his disciples beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees, which he defined as human doctrines. His parable of the leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, till the whole was leavened, impels the inference that the spiritual leaven signifies the science of Christ and its spiritual interpretation. An inference far above the merely ecclesiastical and formal applications of the illustration. Did not this parable point a moral with a prophecy, foretelling the second appearing in the flesh of the Christ, truth, hidden in sacred secrecy from the visible world? Ages pass, but this leaven of truth is ever at work. It must destroy the entire mass of error, and so be eternally glorified in man's spiritual freedom. In their spiritual significance, science, theology, and medicine are means of divine thought, which includes spiritual laws emanating from the invisible and infinite power and grace. The parable may import that these spiritual laws, perverted by a perverse material sense of law, are metaphysically presented as 3 measures of meal, that is, 3 modes of mortal thought. In all mortal forms of thought, dust is dignified as the natural status of men and things, and modes of material motion are honored with the name of laws. This continues until the leaven of spirit changes the whole of mortal thought, as yeast changes the chemical properties of meal.
Swami, help us understand what she means by the 3 modes of mortal thought. And we had just heard, in all mortal forms of thought, dust is dignified as the natural status of men and things, and modes of material motion are honored with the name of the laws. I think there's something in there important for us to understand.
She's talking about the nothingness of matter and how we today, we make such a big deal out of it. But the important thing for me that she said was, this continues until the leaven of spirit changes the whole of mortal thought, as yeast changes the chemical properties of meal. In quantum physics today, and I got this from Death of Materialism on YouTube video, and this is something John von Neumann wrote about. It may be a great example to explain this parable. When talking about the collapse of the wave function being the result of observation, and the function remains until it is met by something which is not bound by the same rules. This can be the Western scientific explanation for the miracle. Things under the influence of karma are held to the belief in 2 powers, which is what rules the collective consciousness today. However, thought, no longer under the influence of this erroneous belief in 2 powers, is now met with a belief in one divine law. Therefore, changes the particle to reflect the new image under the new rule. They also say in the video, consciousness is ultimately and philosophically the cause of the wave function, and the physical existence of matter itself. So let's see why mastering the three modes of mortal thought become the avenue for reflecting the spiritual truth. To do this, we go to the parable of the prodigal son, because we have to understand the importance of the two sons in the story. To be the prodigal, one must leave the father's house, or at least know they are the branch cut off from the vine. The son who stays home is the one who thinks they are going to get the robe and the ring without undertaking the journey, and they are resentful. We do this when we think God is on the field, and I don't have to do anything but let God take you into the kingdom by his or with the demonstration of Jesus or Mary Baker Eddy, the Buddha, Mohammed, or any practitioner. To be worthy of revelation, we have to prepare a hospitable environment which invites divine truth into awareness. It's the only way divine truth can recognize you as itself. But in order to create this hospitable environment, we have to be able to stop thinking, because thought is what creates the veil.
Now, Swami, you have said in the past, we can't stop thinking. So what is it that you're asking us to do?
Well, we stop thinking with the 5 corporeal senses, but then we start knowing with the 7 spiritual senses. There's this chemicalization that takes place when thought shifts from a mental material basis to a spiritual basis. And in order to do this, of course, we need to have this birth of Christ in consciousness. Without the Christ, there's no way of being able to recognize the divine idea. The Christ is the interface. It is what makes the divine creation comprehensive to human consciousness. So again, there is all of this preparatory work that has to be in place in order for us to make this transition from thinking with our 5 corporeal senses to knowing with 7 spiritual senses. It's so much more than just saying it. There really is an evidence procedure that accompanies it. But if you don't have the mental landscape, or as what Mary Baker Eddy suggested, a proper sense of the infinite, in order to hold this thing together on a mortal level so that you can now stop interfering with the divine idea, which is everywhere, always flowing eternally, and be a faithful witness to this invisible, intangible omnipresence, and then bear the fruits of the spirit, not the mental material world of energy.
So, Swami, you said earlier we have to prepare a hospitable environment which would invite this divine truth into our awareness. How would we go about to do that?
You have to purify, eliminate all of the human conjecture, materiality, the belief in mortality out of your consciousness. And then in that silence and stillness, you watch, you wait, you listen, and you let divine truth reveal itself to you. This is what would be called the birth of Christ in consciousness. But that really signifies that shift where you're no longer drawing from the outside world. You're no longer getting your information from duality, and now you're drawing your information from spirit, the invisible, intangible omnipresence. The Christ within will activate your spiritual senses. And then from there on, you are now demonstrating divine law because consciousness is experience. And so you now start to use the testimony of your corporeal senses to help you understand, where is this coming from? Is it coming from the unreal, the false sense of existence, mental, material, human conjecture? Or is it coming from divine truth, the divine principle? And how would you know? Is by the fruits. Divine truth can only bring forth divine perfection. The peace, love, joy, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, patience, temperance. These are the fruits of the Spirit. Your outer picture must start to reflect this inner conscious awareness of the truth. And so again, coming back to what Jesus said, heal the sick, reform sinner, raise the dead. You do it because you are conscious of the divine creation, no longer being fooled by the testimony of the corporeal senses.
So I'd like to go back to the parable about the leaven. Mary Baker Eddy says that this could be a foretelling of the second appearing in the flesh of the Christ. Does that mean knowing with the soul?
Well, what we're talking about here is the second coming. I think most of the world is sitting around and they're waiting for Jesus to come, an external event. But the second coming of Christ is really an inner event. It is the birth of Christ in consciousness. Jesus is long since gone, but the Christ is an eternal principle. It's everywhere, always functioning. But we have to become conscious of it in order to activate it in our experience. Or as Mary Baker Eddy said, ages pass, but this leaven of truth is ever at work. It must destroy the entire mass of error, and so be eternally glorified in man's spiritual freedom. End of quote. This is the freedom from the belief in mortality. For most of us, that's going to be a huge stretch to think this entire human experience is a belief in two powers. Once we graduate from thinking with this mind that can't bring forth the divine image, and we begin to activate spiritual sense so we can know the truth, then we're no longer under the government of karmic law, which, as Mary Baker Eddy said, is nothing more than glorified dust, now under the jurisdiction of divine law, absolute perfection, eternal life, without change.
Swami, where do you suggest we start?
I would suggest that you start with your path of knowledge. Understand the relationship between thought and breath is a good place to start. Your rate of thought is equivalent to your rate of breath. You can develop breathing exercises and thinking exercises. We have divine mind, but it only knows divine truth. And so you stand porter at the door of your thought. Only you don't work with good and bad anymore. You have to work with unreal and real. You have to understand that persons, places, things are not the divine creation. God did not make mortal beings, because by controlling how you think, the next octave of that is to stop thinking and to make your mind aware for the presence of divine mind, so that you can let divine mind take over the scientific government of your body.
Well, that's going to complete the show for today. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages you scroll down, you'll see several buttons there that you can press that will further your understanding. Swami, any final thoughts about today's show?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and stop thinking to start knowing. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.